Hi everyone, Talia from Zart Art. Today we're going to make an embossing foil sculpture. To start off with our embossing foil sculpture, we are going to be using embossing foil. So this is a very thick aluminium foil, so very similar to normal foil that you could get at a grocery store, but this one is thick, so when you press into it, it doesn't break apart. We're also just using this mat to work on, so this is just a soft sheet of foam, so when we press into our foil, it makes an indentation. We've got a few tools here as well that we'll be using to indent into the foil. So a blunt pencil works really well just to get some basic detail. If you want to do different kinds of texture, then these wooden clay tools also work quite well to do things like spots. This one works quite well, and just to do different variations in lines, you can use these kinds of tools to do that. Otherwise, to start off with our sculpture, we'll just be drawing into the foil to start off with. It's also a very good lesson in symmetry. So what I'm going to do is fold the foil over. And now we've got our image that we'll be working off here. So this is just a seahorse that I've done a very rough draft of that we'll be imprinting into the foil. So when we're doing this, it's really good to have a draft picture ready to go, because once you emboss into the foil, it's hard to get rid of the lines that are already imprinted into it. So by having this image to trace over, we can make sure we don't make too many mistakes. So as you can see with this image, we've got just the nose of the seahorse coming off the page. So the reason I've done that is because when we're cutting around our seahorse, I want us to have two images on either side that will be stuck together. So this will create a 3D effect when we are putting our sculpture together. So I'm just going to trace this and making sure that I extend that nose a little bit more to go over the side of the foil. So I'm just going to be using our blunt pencil, and because it is 2 layers of foil that we are trying to go across, you might have to press a bit harder than normal to get all the way through. If you're worried about your picture moving around too much, you can tape it directly onto the foil itself. Especially if you're working with younger students, you might want to do that so you don't lose where you have put down your picture, because if it does move around and then you try and lay it flat back to where it was exactly, it can be difficult to follow the lines that you have already pressed in. So when you are embossing into your picture, you don't have to put in every piece of detail into the draft. You can just take the draft off and then work directly into the foil to create different textures if you wanted to. So I'm just going to pull that off, and as you can see, it's a very fine indentation of our little seahorse shape. And if we look on the other side, it's also got an indentation there. So what I'm going to do is just use some of our different wooden tools to put in some more details and fine lines. Now what you can remember as well is that we will be cutting around this shape, so you don't want to do too fine a line on the outside because you will have to cut around it. So try and make sure that it is something that whatever level student you're doing this with is able to do. So using thicker tools or even thicker lines, it can help the students cut out things a bit better. So this will give me a finer line than what the pencil could give me. I'm going to use the back of this tool just to do some little dots. So this one works quite nicely to emboss a round shape. As you can see, that's quite easy to do. go. So what you'll notice with the embossing foil is that one side is pressed in and the other side is indented out. So when we put these two together, each side will look different, which I kind of like. Now what you can also do with the embossing foil is color it. So what I'm going to do is just use some permanent markers. Any permanent marker will work, and we're just going to create a bit of color over the top of the foil. So you can do this before or after cutting out. I'm just going to do it before cutting it. And what I'm just going to do is loosely apply some color over the top of the foil, and then just using a tissue, I'm going to spread it out because I just want a little bit of a wash. I don't want the color to be too intense. So just using a cloth or a tissue, you can spread that color out instead of it being a very, very intense color. So when you're doing this, you don't have to worry too much about staying inside the lines because we will be cutting it out shortly. So you don't have to be too fussy, especially if you're not going for a very detailed look and you just want a wash of color that's over the top. Now the more you rub with a cloth or a tissue, the more will come off, so you can rub it off completely if you are too heavy-handed with it. Even if you make a mistake of where the colours are going, you can just put more permanent marker over the top and then rub it away with a tissue, and then that will get rid of the colour, so it's quite flexible with how you apply the colours onto this. So now we've just got a wash of colour over our seahorse. You might want to wait a little while for it to dry, but ours should be okay to work with now. So I'm just going to cut around the shape. So if your kids struggle with cutting through thicker foil, then you might want them to cut each one separately, but it is fairly easy with a sharp set of scissors. You can cut around both at the same time. You just want to make sure that the foil doesn't move around too much because we do want to keep that symmetry. Now it's always a good idea when you're cutting out a complicated shape just to cut out some pieces from the sheet first, because then it'll be easier to get around those smaller pieces once we have less foil that we have to work around. Now you just want to make sure that you're not cutting off this piece, which is going to connect our two seahorses together. So just cut to the edge, but don't cut off that piece that will connect them. Okay, so now that we've cut out our two pieces and they're both connected, as you can see, so what I'm going to do is just glue some pieces of this together so they stay in the same shape. So I'm just going to put a little bit of glue onto the body here so that will stay connected like this, and I'll also glue the tail together so it should sit like this once we've finished. So that will connect everything. What I'm also going to do is just create two little fins that I'll stick onto the side, so that will give it more of a 3D look as well. So what I'm going to do is just emboss those now and then cut them out, and we'll glue everything together. Now I'm just going to fold these little pieces up just so it gives us a tab that we can glue onto the rest of the Seahorse. Now I'm just going to be using Supertac. You could definitely use hot glue if you wanted something that's very quick to stick together, but we'll let this sit and wait for a little while, especially if you're working with younger students. You might not want them to use hot glue, so this will stick just as well. So just using a brush, I'm just going to put a little bit of glue in this tail area just so they'll stay together. So we'll just adhere those. And I'm also going to put a little bit of glue in this section, and then we can pull away the foil to make it sit how you want it to sit. So we have that sitting together. Just want to make sure that these stay together as well. So I'll just push this out a little bit. So then that's sitting quite nicely. Just make sure everything is in the right place before you let it dry. And then we'll stick on these two little fins. So I want to make sure that that tab isn't clearly visible. So sitting at about there should work well. Just a little bit of glue, you don't need too much. And if anything falls off, you can always reattach it later on. So now we've got one of our little fins stuck on here, and then we'll just do the other side and make sure that they are symmetrical as well. Just a little bit more of the Supertac. Make sure that's facing the right way. And about there. Should stick on. Now the great thing about Supertac as well is it will dry clear. So if you do accidentally put any glue where it's not meant to go, then it shouldn't really show up on your sculpture, but otherwise that looks pretty symmetrical. And you can adjust this as well even when the glue dries, so you can move the head shape around or even fold out some of these spines if you wanted to, but it's quite flexible and the embossing foil is pretty strong as well. So there's a lot you can do with this and lots of different creations that you can make. So just make sure that you have it exactly where you want it, but otherwise that's our little embossing foil sculpture. Quite a quick and easy activity to do, and lots of different things that you can do with it, especially if you have other tools that you can emboss with, but lots of different ways that you can use embossing foil. So 3D sculptures is definitely a very different way of going about it, so you can extend on that drawing and that pattern making, but otherwise pretty happy with that. We'll let it sit to dry. I hope you enjoyed the video and we look forward to seeing you next time.